On the surface, they could easily be taken for the meekest and mildest of mankind, gentle as lambs, constituting not the slightest danger to the state and the rulership of Rome, for they even had a saying, "It is forbidden to oppose the will of God. Every government rules by the will of God, and therefore it is forbidden to rise against any government." Harmless as this sounded, it was more dangerous to state and government than the rebellions and attacks of the road robbers. The latter were the open enemies of the high priest and of Rome. They declared freely that their only salvation lay in destroying the power of the foreign ruler, and their God Jehovah would help them to achieve this end. We knew what confronted us, but the pretended meekness of the others was a piece of Jewish cunning. They did not rise up against authority. No, not they. They only waited for the coming of their Messiah. We Romans were never able to get a clear picture of what they meant by the word Messiah. Who and what was Messiah? Was he something more than a Jewish king who would liberate Judea from the rule of Rome? Was he also to be a world ruler? They said of him that he would do away with all the evil in the world and introduce goodness everywhere. He would, according to the words which they quoted from the hallucinatory visions of one of their poets, cause the lion to lie down with the lamb, and the lion shall not consume the lamb. He would likewise cause the nations to beat their swords into plowshares, or else, according to the illusions of another of their poets, he would conquer the world not with the sword, as we Romans had done, but with the Spirit of God. And suppose I grant that their deliverer, or Messiah, as they call him, conquers the Roman Empire not with the sword, but with the Spirit. What difference does it make to me by what means they conquer Rome? I was always trying to make this clear to Pilate. The high priest, too, agreed with me that these pious little fellows, these Jews with the sanctified faces, who did not war on Rome, but waited for their Messiah and hastened his coming, were 1,000 times more dangerous than the open rebels. The latter wanted, at most, to drive us from Judea. The others wanted to transform the entire world into one Judea and have all the heathen circumcised into Jewishness. The boundlessness of Jewish insolence! For these Jews I had nothing but hatred from the moment I set eyes on them. I looked on them as the bitterest and most subtle enemies of the ruling power, dark moles undermining the security of Rome. Whenever, from the height of the Antonia, I saw one of them in the temple court, my blood boiled up in me. Wild creatures, almost naked, a leopard or sheepskin thrown over their bodies, unshod feet, fierce tangles of hair, faces burned to a cinder by the desert sun, leanness, hunger, eyes blazing with dark fanaticism, bony hands stretched out toward the sanctuary as if invoking spirits as mad as themselves. They, with their mystic spirits, were to overthrow the Caesar and wipe the name of Rome from the face of the earth in order to make room for their Messiah. The first impression they produced was that of men not belonging to the world. They were incomprehensible and unearthly in their fanaticism. Any other people which had had to put up with such humiliations for the sake of its faith would long ago have abandoned its gods and sought out for itself mightier and more dependable ones. For the life of me, I could not understand what they saw in their God, and in what manner he had ever helped them. A small, poor people in an obscure, desolate country, sown with hills and deserts and subject to the power of Rome, they lived their tortured and uncertain life on sufferance. At any moment we could wipe them out, trample them into the dust. What sort of life was that? I would not subject the unruliest of my slaves to such a ritual as their God imposed on them. No joy, no love, no beauty. He had taken everything from them. And yet, look at the devotion, the incomprehensible faith they bestow on him, the exalted love they feel for him, the voluntary enslavement they suffer for him. And what is their reward? Often I had the feeling that the relationship between them and their God resembled no other relationship between a people and its gods. It was not based on mutual obligation, but on a love without bounds and without conditions. For their God they were prepared to risk and endure everything. For his sake they would even pit themselves against the might of Rome. Therein lay the danger. Jerusalem was full of these fanatics. It often happened that a peasant, coming up to Jerusalem for one of their 3 high holy days, would stay over until the next. In this respect, the inhabitants of Jerusalem were very hospitable to their provincial brethren, and this was particularly true among the poor. Artisans among the pilgrims could obtain work at their trade during the period of their stay in Jerusalem. In the section of the temple area which was reserved for the people, every trade had its reserved location. A goldsmith, a weaver, a tent maker coming up to Jerusalem had only to seek out his fellow craftsmen in order to obtain employment. A place was also reserved for farmers and poor land laborers below the temple area, between the pillars which supported the temple platform. It also happened that because of the great crowding of families which occurred here during the high holy days, infectious diseases broke out and spread rapidly. But the stream of pilgrims brought with it not only the poor, the homeless, the unemployed, and the dispossessed, but large numbers of Galilean rebels, revolutionaries, and inspired fanatics who found in the discontented mass the perfect element for their destructive activities. The congenitally poor, and those who had been dislodged from their foothold on the soil by the weight of taxation, were equally sympathetic material for the dangerous agitation of the zealots. There were frequent altercations between myself and the high priest on this subject. I insisted on the necessity of expelling the accumulated provincial rabble from the city and of limiting the pilgrimages to the high holy days. The high priest, interested in the receipts of the temple treasury, would not hear of it. For the priesthood, a steady, all-year-round flow of pilgrims and strangers was a matter of great importance. This was, moreover, a purely internal religious affair, such at least was their contention, and lay presumably beyond the competence of the Roman jurisdiction. On nights when I could not fall asleep, I would sometimes go out on the gallery of the Antonia and look down from a turret on the temple area. In the quiet night, a rain of starlight came down and was reflected from the golden thresholds, lintels, gates, and plates. The temple area, which during the day swarmed with hosts of men and women, was now silent. No voice was heard, no face was seen. Only the movement of the torches betrayed the presence of the night watchers making the rounds. I was, of course, not intimidated by the unknown God who had chosen, out of all the width of the earth, this place upon a rock, to dwell behind coverings of gold and curtains of purple, surrounded by the eternal fire of his altars. Yet I was ill at ease. It was the unknown and invisible in him which disturbed me and awakened my curiosity. I was greatly tempted more than once to enter the secret passage which led from the Antonia into the sanctuary, to steal quietly past the curtains which cover the place of his abode, to enter the Holy of Holies, to surprise him, to discover who was there, who it was rested between the wings of the mystic birds, to see the unseen and obtain knowledge of the unknown. But I must confess that I lacked the courage. When I looked down on the roof of the Holy of Holies, which rose into the sky above all the other buildings of the temple, and reflected that under it was concealed that unknown God, which, according to the Jews, rules over the destinies of the world, a strange feeling came over me. I was quite certain that our gods were more powerful, Jupiter, for instance, with his thunderbolts. There the proof of it was, the things he had done to the followers of the other. And still, the unknown in the Jewish God made me uneasy. A God who does not embody a single passion, who contains everything within himself, and yet cannot be represented. He does not incarnate a single human quality. He fills the entire universe, and yet he stands above it, and enslaves to himself a people which worships him with the extremest measures of devotion and love. Who is he, this Jewish God?